Welcome to our Harmonius podcast series. My name is Michael Francis Lott, and I am here with author Peter Wells, who is the author of the book Notes from the West Pole. And today we're going to be diving into his piece called That November Mood.
It all started November the 4th, 1968, the night Nixon was elected president. I was walking through the No Name Bar in Sausalito, following friends to the back patio, when, in an instant, as my foot landed on the floor, my life changed. I suddenly realized for the first time that I could do whatever I wanted with my life, and entered a joyous mood, a wide-awake consciousness that has affected me ever since. It was as though I had been in a dream, closed off in some inner way, and yet completely unaware of it. Now I was awake, and everything was obvious. I stayed in that blessed mood, freed from any kind of doubt or anxiety for about 3 weeks, happier and more alive than I had ever been, completely accepting myself and all the selves around me. When the mood left, I didn't return to my old self, but was now a seeker, a believer in a new consciousness, and I wanted more of it. In the spring of 1969, Diane and I were joined by Phyllis, who stayed with us for several weeks and became Felicity. After she left, I noticed a book she had been reading on the sideboard. It appeared to be by an Indian guru, someone called Krishnamurthy. I had no interest in any kind of guru, and so the book remained where she had left it. Anyway, one day, for some unknown reason, I opened the book and read, quote, "You have to find your own way. If you believe in this or that authority, this or that guru, you will never find your own way." Aha! I opened the book several times over the next few months and became intrigued by Krishnamurti's point of view and his insights. I would read a page or two and be reminded of that November mood and noticed how my own fears or doubts were in the way. When, in the summer of that year, Diane and I visited her family in New York, and then my family in England, I brought Krishnamurti's book with me. And then when we impulsively decided to join a group of Australians on an overland journey to India, the book went with us. 2 months later, after an amazing and alarming journey camping across Europe and then Central Asia, we arrived in New Delhi exhausted and collapsed into a modern hotel with showers and clean sheets. The next morning, we had an English breakfast of eggs and toast and tea and sat at a table with a South African lady called Joan. And during the conversation, she mentioned that later that day, she would be attending a talk by Krishnamurti. So, of course, we went with her and sat expectantly in the large white tent filled with about 500 people, mostly dressed in white. He arrived quietly, also dressed in white, and sat cross-legged on a kind of dais, surveying the reverent congregation. He spoke, and we listened, but it was not inspiring to me. I was surprised to see his hair combed sideways to hide his baldness, and he certainly seemed to be acting like a guru. I was even more critical when, after opening the meeting for questions from the audience, he ignored one questioner, and then another, and then finally left the stage in a huff. I was amazed. Here was this very rational person, this brilliant thinker, whose book I was carrying around the world, having a public tantrum for no apparent reason. I asked Joan, "What was that all about? What just happened?" "You seem upset," she said. We walked along the road back towards the hotel, and I continued to express my disappointment. Joan was sympathetic. "If you're very upset, I could possibly arrange for you to discuss it with Krishnaji in person." "Really?" I said. "That would be great." So she made a phone call, and I had an appointment. Later that afternoon, I was taken across New Delhi in a bicycle rickshaw to a bungalow on a quiet, unpaved street, and was greeted by a woman in a sari. She introduced herself as Pupil and offered me tea on the veranda overlooking her beautiful garden. At last, after tea, she ushered me into a room with 2 open windows and furnished with just 2 chairs, in one of which sat Krishnamurthy. I sat in the other chair, and we smiled and nodded a silent greeting. Now I realized I have to ask him a question. I felt awkward receiving such special treatment, especially since I was more surprised than upset. So I just started to talk. I apologized for taking his time for something trivial, but I had come to his talk filled with the expectation of hearing his wisdom in person. I had read one of his books, brought with me from California, and was impressed with his point of view and his insights into the way the mind works. Today, I said, I was so surprised when asking for questions from the audience. You refused to answer some of them, and then, abruptly, you left the stage, apparently angry at the audience. "Ah, yes," he said, I was a bit angry then, but I'm not now." He laughed. "You see, some of those people come to all my talks. They follow me wherever I go and ask the same questions. They don't care about the answers. They just want to appear clever. So now, I don't answer. But it is annoying. I can't think of any other way to deal with it." He laughed again. "I don't want to encourage them, you see." "Oh," I said, "I see." We sat silently. He was still smiling. I think I was too. And we sat there in the quiet, open-windowed room, waiting for my next question. I didn't feel like leaving. My mind raced in search of something to fill the silence. At some point, I looked at him, and then my mind just relaxed, and I stopped thinking. I don't know how long it lasted, but once again, I was in that November mood of acceptance. And he was in it too. In fact, he had induced it. So we just sat there, being the whole thing, wide awake on another wavelength than thought. Wide awake on another wavelength than thought. After a timeless time, I realized that I needed to find a way to experience this feeling of wholeness every day. What was preventing me? Some kind of fear? I broke the silence. I think I need to go to a very quiet place for a while to figure out what to do with my life. To let myself flow and just see what happens. "Yes," he said. "Yes, exactly the thing to do." As I left Krishnamurthy and Pupil on the veranda, there were tears and a warm current of emotion between us. The bicycle rickshaw man, Sindhu, was waiting for me at the gate, and as he pedaled me away, Krishnamurthy waved goodbye with surprising enthusiasm from the veranda. Something had just happened. My quest for that November mood had been reinforced. My daily life would now be focused on clearing the way.
So I really appreciate this piece because actually Krishnamurti played a pivotal role in my early stages of spiritual awakening. And the thing that really jumps out at me from this piece is this whole wavelength other than thought that you spoke about experiencing with Krishnamurti. And you experienced it at the No Name Bar, and then you experienced it again with Krishnamurti. So did you entrain to his consciousness or something? Or how did that occur?
Well, it did. I went with him into his meditation. And whereas I'd been sitting there thinking of what next to say, all of a sudden I stopped thinking. And we were both sitting there, as I say, on another wavelength than thought. Well, it turned out that that wavelength was actually the November mood, and that the absence of any thinking, of any chatter inside my head, was a very fresh feeling. And as we sat there, we totally joined. I think we kind of bonded, and it became emotional. And when I left, he kind of wept a little bit, I wept a little bit, and even Pupil wept a little bit. And the whole point of it, though, is that this wavelength that I was so fascinated with, and I still am, is really about the mind being quiet. It's about not thinking, because the intelligence of the being continues even as we don't think. And as I sat there with him in this beautiful open-windowed room, I was suddenly aware that I didn't have to think. And not thinking allowed the intelligence of the whole being to wake up and to be present.
So with Krishnamurti, it was like he kind of triggered that experience in you, that really beautiful experience. But at the No Name Bar, you kind of experienced that from within yourself on your own. So one of the things that I'm curious about is, how did that sensation come about, just kind of in the reality of your normal experience?
It was just a very sudden and shocking experience. All of a sudden, I realized that I could do whatever I wanted with my life, and I'd never fully realized that before. And so there I am in this bar following my friends to the back patio, and I'm waking up. I'm being awake. Now, this is hindsight. At the time, it was too shocking and too raw for me to have any real thought about it. But afterwards, I realized I had entered another consciousness, and that this consciousness was the most interesting and fascinating part of me. And I needed to revive that. As I say in the piece, I stayed in that mood for 3 weeks. And I was lifted out of it by a discussion with a person who was argumentative. And as I tried to respond to the argument, I entered into my normal thinking state, where I was trying to prepare language to deal with his argumentativeness. So, and then the next time I experienced it, I was aware of it. I was aware of the fact that this consciousness exists in me, but how do I get it? How do I achieve it? Well, the next time I achieved it was with Krishnamurthy in that room. And I realized that the fundamental part of it was not thinking, was resting the mind. The mind does not have to work all the time. We don't have to generate chatter and thoughts to be here. We have a whole intelligence that's already alive and awake. And so I began to practice, you might say, not thinking. And that meditation is something I still utilize. The idea is that I don't need to think. In order to be here, in order to enjoy this life and fulfill this self, I don't need to think.
Now, going back to the first time that you experienced that at the No Name Bar, you said it lasted for about 3 weeks?
Yes.
Right? So let me ask you this. In that state of not thinking and of resting the mind, how did you integrate that into your life? How did you carry that into your relationships? Because you need to think to navigate your way through existence, right? So how did that wavelength integrate into the reality of your actual life?
Well, I would give a part of each day, usually in the early morning, to the reminder that I can be here without thinking. Then I would need to think about my day. What am I going to do? What are the issues? But the meditation, I guess you might as well call it, begins with not thinking, begins with being open-minded and allowing the whole being just to be. Now, this is many years later, and I've become practiced at that. So now I can not think almost whenever I want.
I love what you said about you sort of accessing that from a reminder of getting a taste of that experience and then reminding yourself of the possibility of that. And I think a lot of people on the spiritual path kind of have different ways of accessing that. Some people go through extended periods of meditation. Other people dabble with psychedelics, and they get these peak experiences, and it's kind of a window into the reality of what actually is. And for me, in my own personal experience, that's kind of what I do, is I've had those experiences, and then I'll remind myself, maybe in the beginning of the day, of the reality of how I actually want to operate. So, going into your daily experience now, how do you continue to access that wavelength?
Well, it's already there. All I have to do is stop thinking, and it's there. And the awareness is of this whole being without any definition. I can't define this whole being. This whole being is existing on wavelengths that my mind, my thinking organ, doesn't understand. The whole brain is operating without my thought. And if I try to think about it, I get to a dead end. But I can be it. And in being it, with the mind quiet, with the thinker quiet, there are those other wavelengths available. One cannot go suddenly to them and define them. I was aware, as soon as I had that first experience in the No Name Bar, I was aware that I was in hunt for it. And I took psychedelics. I took LSD and I took mescaline. And what I experienced there was maybe an intensification of thought, because suddenly I was dealing with a deep feeling, and that feeling was perhaps a fear, was a doubt, was an uncertainty. And so that had to be gone in order for me to be in that November mood. I couldn't be fearful or doubtful and be in that mood, because the fear and the doubt were all thought.
Wow, okay. So you kind of entered into a space of confronting the blocks that sort of prevented you from remaining in that state on a consistent basis, right?
Yeah, well, the block was fear. And taking the LSD, I experienced the fear. I experienced great joy, too, and I loved the experience of seeing nature in a new way. And it was as though a screen had been taken away from my vision, and I was looking really into the life of things. And the question that haunted me was, how do I not think? And that became kind of a mantra, where I was really expecting the intelligence of the whole being to be available. I mean, this is sounding strange, I know that, but when I talk about the intelligence of the whole being, I'm saying the conscious and the unconscious. Right now, I'm using the whole brain, even though I'm not aware of it. My digestive system is functioning, the cells are being renewed, millions, billions of events are going on that my mind is not aware of. So the clarity was that my mind could not resolve the issue of the November mood. The mind, the thinker, the ideas were in fact in the way. And that the November mood was an absence of thought, an absence of normal everyday identification. What is Peter Wells doing today? None of that. It was allowing the consciousness to be whole, and to not divide it, to not be questioning it, and just being it.
Now, one of the things that comes up for me in this whole notion of not thinking is I went through a period when I was younger of learning how to meditate, and I would kind of sit down and silence myself and try to stop my thoughts. And I found that to be a battle for me, to just, how do I stop my thoughts? I can't stop thinking. And for me, how I navigated that was, rather than focusing on not thinking, bring my awareness into the feeling the feeling sensation. How does my body feel? And I found that feeling my body, feeling my emotions kind of allowed me to inhabit this deeper reality. And it did sort of silence my thoughts because I was bringing my awareness into a deeper realm of existence, which was the feeling realm. So for me, that's how I access that state, is really sensitizing myself to what I'm feeling, both on a physical, visceral, and an emotional level.
Yeah, but as soon as you begin to evaluate that feeling, you're no longer in it. So the idea behind it is not the key. There is no idea. The key is just being. Mm. And the being is not judged. You can't judge it. You can't evaluate it. It just is. It's already happening. It's happening right now with us. We're already utilizing wavelengths that we can't define with our mind. But those wavelengths are happening. Mm-hmm. And this consciousness, which we've called the consciousness of the soul, is of the whole being, which includes the conscious and the unconscious. What I know and what I don't know about myself. What I don't know about myself doesn't change the fact that I am this. So in being this and of accepting what is, which is Krishnamurti's term, in the acceptance of what is, the mind can rest.
Nice.
And one can't judge it. One can't evaluate it and say, okay, now I want to enter this beautiful mood that I've experienced in the past. It's very difficult. The practice, I think, is, if there is one, and each one of us is different, the practice is to be rather than to think.
And what is your personal practice into being?
I go and sit or walk beside the ocean almost every day. And I clear my mind out so it has nothing to think about. And then my awareness is without memory, without detail, and it just is. And it's like a refreshing feeling of opening. It's kind of like listening to music, or there's so many wavelengths that are available to us, and music can be that, and you don't necessarily have to think when you're listening to music. Our thinking is so concerned with our identity, and our identity is so concerned with the society that we're a part of. And there is a consciousness beyond the living experience of being in this society. We are perfectly able to access our whole intelligence all the time. In fact, we can't even shut it off.
I will thank you for this lovely discussion, Peter. Until next time. Stay connected with us and get the book Notes from the West Pole on our website, www.harmonius.com, and that's spelled Harmony Us with a Y. Thanks for listening.